just mentioned this to me about an hour ago, but I had great excitement about it because Jay and I have been friends for about 3 years. He's my go-to on biochemistry if I have a question. He's brilliant, master's degree in nutrition, functional nutritionist. We're not talking about biochemistry today.
No, and if you cry, I'm going to leave, Zane, I swear.
You're a good friend, but
you can cry.
Not good.
No, I actually asked to do a biochemistry lecture, but Brett said the projector was broken. I don't believe him,
but he's brilliant. So if you're looking for that, he explains it in terms that the rest of us can really understand and digest. Substack is brilliant as well. So he's not talking on his normal rant. Let's say his different brilliant rant that he normally has. Today we're talking about in the house of Bitcoin here, food sovereignty, and how important of a topic that is right now. It's actually, I think, more important than most people realize because of its impending, the growth that it has, the momentum it has right now of the government restricting that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of everything that I've heard today, and this last talk was, I would have volunteered some of my time to hear some more of this. It was fantastic. And just to add some statistics, so I think crowd health, I think you said 4.3 trillion on healthcare, right? So I had statistics from 2020. It was 4.1 trillion at that point. But I want to give you a little bit of context for that, because 4.1 trillion, 4.3 trillion, what's the difference? Well, expressed as a percentage of the gross domestic product of the United States, that's 19.7% of our GDP, okay? That's 4.1 trillion in just healthcare. If you want to just guess, what do you think we spend on defense as a percentage of the gross domestic product? So 19.7 is on healthcare. Anybody have a guess what we spend on defense? 4%. It's 3.7%. So we spend 6 times as much on healthcare. So who needs enemies, right? We can just eat ourselves to death, and that's pretty much what we're doing. And so that's, to be a good nutritionist today, I feel like you have to have a little bit of understanding of geopolitics and just a lot of other areas. You can't just keep your head in the biochemistry, as much as I love to do that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So So I mean, we can talk about. I'll have Zane. You got to keep me on track here, because we could go through dietary guidelines. We could go through a lot of different things. But where would you? Well,
let's start with. Okay, so let's explain to people what we mean by the food sovereignty and what the threat is to that.
So there's something new that's been happening over the last couple of years called C40 cities. I don't know if anybody even knows what that is, because I didn't know what it was until about 6 months ago. So C40 cities are a collection of cities around the world. Nashville's not one of them, luckily, but it's New York, it's Houston, it's Madrid, it's Melbourne, Australia, it's Los Angeles, it's everywhere, Vancouver. And it's a collection of mayors who by the year 2030 have decided that they're going to control basically 6 major economic factors of your life. Now, I got involved in this because food was one of them. And they want to control, and I say that specifically, they want to control the food that you eat. And I think it was you, or it was Dr. Barry who mentioned the... I just lost my train of thought. Eat Lancet, that's right. Oh, right. So I did the math on Eat Lancet, and what they're going to allow in terms of meat consumption is 1.5 ounces per day. That's these C40 cities, including the city that I live in, New York City, which I'm trying desperately to get out of now. They want to track your meat and dairy consumption because they say that contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. And so we're not going to get into that much today, but I'll tell you the facts and the data surrounding greenhouse gas emissions when it comes to agriculture and crop versus animal, it would shock you to no end. I'm sure it wouldn't shock you, but it would shock a lot of people, that red meat is not the tyrant that it's made out to be in terms of greenhouse gas. In fact, when properly raised, it's incredibly beneficial for the environment. Carbon sequestration. You got it. Carbon sequestration.
Correct. So you're saying that's actually beneficial.
Right, it's beneficial for us and the planet, despite what the World Economic Forum tells you, despite what the United Nations had a great headline recently in a paper that said, addressing the world's most urgent problem, meat. I thought that was rather shocking. I can think of at least one other problem that's more important than meat. Yeah. But who am I? So
these used to be choices we would make
right.
individually about what we wanted to eat, and we had some guidelines come down the road that maybe tried to sway us differently. It seems to have kind of snowballed into something more of a commodity.
Intellectual property. is the term. So Dr. Sarah Martin did this talk in Ottawa. It was a Future of Protein was this name of this conference. And she referred to food as intellectual property. And she said the reason that there are so many plant-based burgers out there and all these foods is because market control is the goal, and this is all intellectual property. So, I mean, what happens when you can't grow your own food in your backyard anymore? You know, we've been here all day listening to some amazing speakers talk about, reclaiming your health and taking control of your health, which I'm a huge advocate for. But what happens when people who are sort of pulling the strings, or the mayor in the city that you live decides you don't have the right to do that anymore? So if you determine that plants are great for you, that's fine. I want you to have that right. But if you determine that meat is good for you, you should have that right too. Are we going to start putting limits on how much broccoli you can consume? I mean, maybe, but I guess the point is, I think this should be a uniting factor, right? Whether you're a carnivore or a vegetarian or a vegan, I think we need to get rid of these labels because they're just cleverly disguised ways to continue to divide the population. And I think that most of the population would just want the choice, right? Be presented with the data, the accurate data on how meat affects health, how vegetables affect health, all of these things, and then make your own choice. But that choice is being stripped away with C40 cities and those. And by the way, it's six total sectors. So it's food. See if I can remember all these. It's food. It's clothing. It's vehicles, electronics, construction, and aviation. I did it. Oh. So I mean, most of those directly impact our life. I mean, how long before I can't get on a plane to come down here because I've reached my carbon allotment because I ate too much meat last week. I mean, there's a sign over there that says, that's central bank digital currency down to the CBDC. I agree, so now what I do is, I don't know if they're tracking it yet in New York. Supposedly the mayor is. I buy all my meat in cash, and I buy So I mean, because that can't be tracked. So holding on to cash is critical. So, I mean, this is what I mean about I don't think you can be a nutritionist anymore. I got a master's degree in clinical nutrition. Congratulations. Now I need to figure out the rest of my life because this stuff is so important. And if the choice is stripped away, then we're just not going to end up, we're not going to end up where we want to end up or where we thought we were going to end up when we were young and dumb kids, just sort of, doing our own thing. So that's been my passion lately. And I can rant about biochemistry, but I can rant about other things too.
Absolutely. Well, the government's supposed to be looking out for us, right? They're supposed to be facilitating health, facilitating the best for the public. What's driving this change? Why are they suddenly trying to restrict our choices? Why are they driving everything in this direction? I mean, why aren't our nutrition guidelines reflecting what you and I know is current science? Why isn't the DGAC reflecting, changing their guidelines to reflect what we've seen come out in the last 20 years?
So anybody that thinks the dietary guidelines were ever evidence-based is wrong. And I wish I could say otherwise, because quite honestly, it gets tiring coming up here and just trashing all the government institutions. But I wouldn't do it if it wasn't the truth, And so this is one of my favorite things. So the original dietary guidelines, I wish I could go through the whole history of nutrition for you guys, because I'm actually giving a talk later on this weekend here in Nashville on that topic, and it's fascinating. But there's a straight line that can be drawn all the way from the 1800s and the Seventh-day Adventist Church and Ellen Gould White. No offense to any Seventh-day Adventist, but she wasn't trained in nutrition. She wasn't trained in science. She sustained a severe head injury at 9 years old, claimed that she was talking to God, and God told her to stop eating meat. That's the truth. That's what happened. And those sort of teachings got passed down to her protege, who's John Harvey Kellogg of Kellogg's Corn Flakes. Then he opened up a sort of a health and wellness recreation center called the Battle Creek Sanitarium, where wealthy industrialists and politicians would come and they would get healthy. So now you can start to see his influence, who was directly influenced by Ellen Gould White. One of his proteges was Lena Cooper, who founded the American Dietetics Association. So now you've got a straight line from the 1800s all the way up to the American Dietetics Association. And if you tangentially from Ellen Gould White was a gentleman named Nathan Pritikin, who was a low-fat, low-salt advocate. He read all of Ellen Gould White's work, and he thought it was hysterical, he said, she must have been inspired by God because she had no nutrition training, no scientific training, and she came up with all this amazing health advice. I kind of thought, well, you hit the nail on the head. She had no evidence for this. It was what she believed, and I don't have any problem with it, what anybody believes. But I do have a problem when you're going to start to institute this on a population scale. We have to be a little bit careful there. And then from there, Nathan Pritikin was good friends with Senator George McGovern, and so I'm getting to the dietary guidelines just in case you were wondering, where's this guy going? Senator George McGovern ran the first dietary guidelines for the United States in the 1970s. And in July 1976, they debated all of the science on nutrition. You know how long it took them to debate all the science on nutrition and give us that fantastic food pyramid? Must have been weeks, months, years even? 48 hours. 48 hours, and there we go. We've got a food pyramid, and then it became a food plate. I think there was probably another shape in there. And now we've got something that maybe the food compass is something that you've probably seen a little bit about in the news. The food compass is not dietary dogma yet, but I think we're heading there, and if you look at the funders of that, you see people like General Mills, you see people like that have basically funded everything, the Rockefeller Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, all these people. And the theme is stay away from real food, stay away from food that can walk around your backyard, or that you can grow in a garden, and eat the highly industrial foods that are actually stripping the planet of resources, destroying the soil, and at the same time contributing to this $4.1 trillion or $4.3 trillion burden we spend on healthcare. So it's out of control, and I travel around because I want to educate people too. As a clinical nutritionist, I should be sitting there looking at labs and doing all these things, but I don't want to do that because I think this is where the change actually happens, in these decentralized groups. So I'm just so proud of all of you for even being here, which is, it's just amazing to walk into a room and see a bunch of people who are just willing to learn. And so my kudos to the Meat Mafia for arranging this, and kudos to all of you for coming out.
So what has happened to the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics now? So what's driving their choices?
It's the same corporations. So the Dietary Guidelines Committee, I don't know if anybody knows this, but in 2020, there was a paper published that found 19 of 20 members, 95% had conflicts of interest with food and or pharmaceutical companies. So, it's not a guarantee that you're going to get poor advice, but it's a pretty good indicator.
So you're saying they're getting money?
Yeah. And one of so they found, let me see if I can remember the numbers, they found over 700 conflicts of interest. This is a 20-member board. It's 700 conflicts of interest. One member alone accounted for about 152 of the conflicts of interest. So, so this is my, I'm like Batman of nutrition. This is what I do, on my own time, but I work for a company, a corporate wellness company. And so I work with other nutrition professionals. And when I have to sit through work meetings, I have to hear things like, of course the food pyramid is evidence-based, and I just have to hit the mute on Zoom, or I have to pretend that I have to shut off the camera so I can, So that's the other thing, right? Our nutrition professionals aren't even necessarily educated the way we need. So that's why it's so important for you guys to learn about this stuff on your own, because you guys are the future. It's not just going to be one clinical nutritionist or one doctor or one trainer. You guys have to take control of your health. You have to be curious. You have to always ask questions. You shouldn't even believe me. You should go look up that whole rant I just did on the dietary guidelines. Go look up Ellen Gould White. You'd be amazed. And it's like, how do we, why do we know what we think we know? Where does that come from? And usually it's just stories passed down from people. It's not really evidence. So I'm a big fan of history too, in case you couldn't tell.
I just saw a paper, I think it was the end of last year, showing that the corporate takeover of the A&D, actually the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, right, showing that they actually are running their internal notes, their internal memos past corporate heads.
Yes.
With like Nabisco and
Coca-Cola,
Kraft.
Yeah.
And so they're running it back. So before we release something to the public, let's run it past our benefactors, basically. So that's who's paying for our nutrition education.
It is, and in fact, the original dietary guidelines, when it was translated into that pyramid that we all know and love, it actually looked very different. And one of the lead nutritionists said that when she got, a group of her colleagues got together and they created this pyramid, but when she gave it to the politicians to sort of, cement it in stone, she said, the industry got control of it and started to move things around because every industry has a lobby, right? Including the meat industry and the dairy industry, right? But I think we know which lobbies are the most powerful. And so she said that she said actually, she was quoted in the 1980s, because I can't remember what year the pyramid actually rolled out. The dietary guidelines were 70s, mid 70s, but the pyramid came out, it might have even been like late 80s, early 90s. I
think it was
84, okay. And she said, if we roll this out to the public, we're going to, now this is not in the 1980s, she said, we're going to have an epidemic of obesity and type 2 diabetes. And what do we have today? We have an epidemic of obesity and type 2 diabetes. So even the pyramid, once it was already poorly designed at the beginning, but then even when it finally hit the public, it wasn't without corporate interest. So this has been going back since probably the dawn of time, but certainly since the dawn of the government getting involved in nutrition, which I really wish they would just avoid. In fact, actually, the Iowa senator Senator Grassley, I think is his name, he just asked the Dietary Guidelines Committee to halt all processes until we can figure out their conflicts of interest, because one of the new members for the 2025 committee, it was just discovered that now you may have seen her on the news, she was talking about the genetic component of obesity, and she said obesity is driven by primarily genetics. She said it was like 85% or something. And it was found out that she has received like $32,000 from, pharmaceutical companies. So he said, we shouldn't have dietary guidelines if we can't do them right. And I wholeheartedly agree. I wish I lived in Iowa. I'd give that man a vote.
Excellent. Yeah, the processed food company is one of the largest lobbyists in the country as well. They're not just behind pharma, from what I understand.
Right.
So what can we do about this? I mean, what are our steps? What, other than buying beef from your local farmer, what kind of activist, activity can we participate in?
Well, I mean, certainly the first step is education. I mean, I love that part of this. I've already said that. Buying local as much as you can. I know that we're never going to be able to, we probably don't want to get rid of supermarkets, but at least for the most nutrient-dense foods like meat and eggs, I would say try to get some percentage of your daily food from sort of a source that is not going to be disrupted by supply chains. I mean, what did we just witness over the past 3 years of COVID, right? We need to have that sort of resiliency built into our nutrition strategy. So again, that's another part of what I do. I can tell people all day long to go to the grocery store and buy X, Y, and Z, but what if that grocery store is closed down? Or what if the shelves go bare? Like they did at if you remember, early 2020, right? When people were freaking out over toilet paper. And I was like, toilet paper is not a necessity, right? I know it's a nice thing to have, but you can live without it. But meat, now that's something different. So try and find. Do you say that you actually can help people find local? Yes. Yeah, I mean, what a valuable resource that is. I mean, I have a couple of farms. One of the farms I buy from is an Amish farm in Pennsylvania, because I'm up in the Northeast, and they deliver to the tri-state area. So I have them bring their stuff over, and oh man, what a great Saturday morning that is. Cracking open the raw kefir and it's fun. So that's the biggest thing, the education, and then finding some way to make your food, your personal food chain, resilient and you're supporting the local farmers who will be there for you when nobody else is, right? So that's another huge thing. So those, I know most people have top 3. I only have 2. Sorry.
All right, guys, that's all we have time for today with Jay. Unfortunately, you and I could talk for days, but thank you.